Hi, it's Kane Dalton here from BikeSocial. We're here in Almeria with Kawasaki at the world exclusive launch of the ZX10R SE. I'm standing here with Craig Watson, who's the UK sales manager, who's going to help us out with a little bit of the information regarding what's new with the bike now. Hi Craig.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you. So I wonder if you could just tell us, first off, why is it not green?
We've got little bits of green on it, little bits of green. We went for this colour scheme. Two reasons. One, we wanted it quite high end, but quite clearly different to Pure Ninja Race, the KRT replica. So there's actually a lot of 3D elements on there in the paintwork down the side. But also we've gone for this sort of this subtle element of green rather than bold green.
Well, the little green bits on the front make it look quite angry. I quite like that.
Do you like that?
It looks quite aggressive from the front. So at first glance, when I had a look at it and I saw the green peeking out the front, I was like, it looks angry. I really like it. So I guess the big news then for this particular bike is the new electronic suspension, or the shower electronic suspension.
Absolutely. I mean, the key really is the standard bike has very, very high grade shower suspension on there. We were the first manufacturer to fit gas cartridge fork and rear shock, you know, something that was literally derived from the World Superbike teams. What this bike does is it adds electronic damping to that already very high grade suspension, and I suppose that the reason for that is to allow more people to experience just how pliant the standard suspension is, because in reality not everybody is brave enough to get their screwdriver out and actually start adjusting the damping for different conditions of either road or racetrack.
I mean, I know typically myself, you know, when I first started riding high performance bikes, I didn't touch the suspension. I mean, it really scared me. I wasn't quite sure what a couple of clicks was going to do. I didn't quite understand what rebound versus compression was. I had a friend that was always playing with all of these things and was always complaining about how bad the bike was. So I kind of just rode what I had. And when I started getting more into racing and I started playing around with things, again, it was just sort of try a few things. I got to a point where I just rode what I had because I didn't fully understand the whole thing. And so you basically saying that this is kind of making it easier for people to understand what's going on with the bike.
Absolutely. I mean, we gave you an opportunity this morning on the road. We gave you a section of road and we asked you to ride it in two very different settings, a road setting and a race setting. I mean, how did it feel to you?
I mean, for me, it was really interesting to ride the same section twice, because if you're riding a different part or a different road, you might not take in quite as much in terms of how or what the bike was doing. And with the road setting, it felt kind of quite natural to me. I wasn't thinking about it quite as much. I was concentrating on the road. We had fairly tight corners. We had sections of the road where we were literally on one side of the tire to the other in fairly quick succession, and it dealt with that all really well, and it felt really compliant and really comfortable. So really it was good enough that I wasn't really having to think about it that much. Going back around again and then riding the same section on road on the harder or the track settings made the world of difference, because all of a sudden you could feel every little bump. The bike was a little bit more skitty because it was obviously set up a lot harder. In some instances when I was quite hard on the brake and changing direction quite quickly, I even had the back wheel come up a few times. So, and of course these are the kind of things that, you know, on track, you know, it's not as, you know, it's not as much of a bigger deal in terms of the bumps and everything else. Tracks are well, you know, I mean, look at the beautiful surface we have here. So for me to see the difference in action was very interesting.
I mean, one of the key parts for the engineers was to get the feel right, because we're adjusting the damping on the fork and the shock. Number two, you know, there's two things really. We've got to know what we're doing, we've got to know why we're doing it, and we've got to understand the effect it has relative to the changes we've made. And we're the only manufacturer that have actually got stroke sensors within the fork and within the shock that are measuring two things. They're measuring actually the length of the stroke, so the amount of dive, but also the rate of change, the speed that stroke's working at. Now, we take that information lots and lots of times. It actually does it every single millisecond. So in the time it takes you to blink your eye, it's done it 300 times. It's 1,000 times a second. So we can make a change and see the effect of that change instantly. If there was a time delay or a time lag in these changes, to you as a rider, it would actually feel a little bit alien, if you like. So if we've succeeded in that, it should have felt very natural to you on the road.
I mean, I've ridden other bikes with electronic suspension on, and I've run it on manual settings, which kind of completely turns off the damping, and then I've run it back to back with the electronics on. And what I've found quite interesting is, especially downhill when you're braking quite hard, when it's on a manual setting, it doesn't really sort of do it. It just feels like a standard bike.
Yeah.
When you have it set up with the electronic damping on other bikes and you pull on the brake, it actually pushes up on the front, and you can feel it push up on the front, which is quite an odd alien type of a feeling. I didn't get that today.
No.
So where we were sort of traveling downhill, some cases off camber, and then putting the brake on, and you sort of, it felt natural. It didn't feel like it was pushing back on me at all, which was really quite interesting. I mean, from an overall perspective, I quite like the geometry of the bike anyway. I like being tucked in on the bike. I like the way the tank sits, so I sort of naturally, I'm kind of a bit over the front. So I'm quite sensitive to what's actually happening from a feedback point of view, and I wasn't that aware of anything like that happening on the road, at least today.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got, you just mentioned it when you go into manual, just to sort of be clear with our system, we've got 3 settings effectively: a road setting, a track setting, and the broad basic difference between the two is one is set more compliant and soft, but has got the backup, because it's working with softer suspension. It has a deceleration map within it to control that front end dive on the brakes. The race setting is generally firmer, but we have a manual setting. And again, one thing that's absolutely key to our system is, even when you have manually selected a compression damping, a rebound damping on the front fork, compression and rebound on the rear shock, and there's 15 of each, so there's 50,000 possibilities you can go for. But within that, the electronics do still work. They're just working from effectively the map that you've created as a base level. They still will alter the damping around your base.
I mean, obviously riding on track today was quite interesting, playing around with the different options. So I think initially we rode it on just the standard track, then the rear ABS was turned off. I didn't feel that much difference between having that on or off. We then went into the manual settings. I think one of the riders, or one of your test riders, had played around with creating a map that he thought worked quite well for this particular track. So when we went to that manual setting, it was actually quite a marked difference between what the base level was, and I really enjoyed that. You know, it felt a lot more stable for me. On the brakes, it felt more stable. So coming down the back straight here, when you're braking really hard, you're coming down from 6th gear to 2nd, and the front was sort of all kind of moving around, and the back was kind of loose. And then when we went to that manual setting, I had a lot less of that. So it's quite nice to actually see that actually you could play around with that a little bit as well.
Yeah, we've been supported on this test by Bridgestone, and they've supplied us with lots of brand new R11 tyres, and that was what we did yesterday. Was we sent a test rider out to develop this custom setting, if you like, for those tyres on this track in this bright sunshine but actually quite cold temperature.
So I mean, other than the sort of, you know, the big news being the suspension, I mean, what makes the SE different to a standard ZX10?
So 3 key differences. The suspension you've already mentioned. It now has a quick shifter both up and down, so the auto blipper to help you. So from when you leave pit lane, you're never going to touch the clutch lever again, unless you run off track. But you won't do that with the suspension.
No, not me.
And the high grade Marchesini wheels, which help this change of direction. They're a lightweight wheel, but the key is they carry the majority of their mass in the centre of the hub. So the gyroscopic mass, which is what slows you down in change of direction, is much lighter and therefore faster.
So in terms of the engine, it's not the RR engine, is it?
Correct.
So why did you not go for the RR engine? If you've got all the other upgrades on this particular bike, why not the RR as well?
Cost. It's if we fitted that, you'd probably be looking another 1,000-ish on top. So that engine was literally a homologation special engine. It's got a deeper allowance in the cylinder head to fit very high lift cams, and that's great for racing. With electronic suspension, you can't race it. There's no series that you can race it in at British or national level, if you like. So the engine would kind of be overkill, because a lot of what's in the RR is to do with superbike racing.
So who is this bike really aimed at? I mean, what sort of, where does it fit within the market from having that it's got the electronic suspension, it's got all the other upgrades, but you can't race it? Who are you kind of hoping to capture with the bike?
I think it's somebody like me, generally. I don't play with suspension. I don't trust myself to play with suspension. I wouldn't know the effect I should expect from altering either compression and rebound, but I know what a good bike feels like.
Yeah.
This is kind of like having your own factory technician on the bike all the time, measuring and altering things 1,000 times a second. I like the idea of that. So I like riding on the road. I like doing track days, lots of track days. So this, at a flick of a switch effectively, I can go from having a really compliant motorcycle on the road that handles, that changes direction, that absorbs braking pressures, to having the best of the other world, riding on a racetrack and giving me the support I need for much more enthusiastic riding.
Yeah, I mean, arguably most people see the ZX10 as a track tool.
Yes.
It's basically like a race bike for the road.
Yeah.
And when I've tasted them before, I've always found that on the low end there hasn't been quite as much grunt when you sort of put the power on, and then all of a sudden it sort of rushes and it comes at you, which I find quite exciting.
Yeah.
I quite like that, and on track I find, like, when that power comes in, it's almost like a kind of two-stroke feel, and things sort of start rushing at you. But I really quite liked it on the road, because that lower, lesser aggressive feel meant you could be a lot smoother. I was a lot smoother today. Having the quick shift going up and down was amazing. That was seamless for me. And just rolling through all those bends and having the less aggressive feel on the bike, I really quite enjoyed. And then when we sort of came out of the corners and we saw the open up straights and you sort of gave it a handful, it was then became really exciting. So I guess depending on how you look at it, some people say race bike, you know. The road ride today I really enjoyed, which I wasn't sure I was. I was kind of expecting it to be a little bit dull on the lower end, but it wasn't at all, so I really enjoyed that.
There's some fantastic roads around here, that's for sure. Yeah.
Great. Well, we've had a really wonderful time today riding the bike. We've ridden in a number of conditions. Amazing on the road, had the track to ourselves pretty much, so we had a lot of opportunity to play around with the suspension and the braking, and it's an outstanding bike. So thank you very much. Thank you, Craig.